So we are recording, and I'm going to go ahead and let everybody in. I remember to do that.
Oh, I think, Kristen, you need to give me permission so that I can record the Spanish side.
Okay. Oh, on the other one. I'm going to make you a co-host on both. Okay. Participant. Oh, Tabitha, I feel your pain now. Now I know what you were going through. Okay, well, that option's not there anymore, so I'm going to pick a different way. I'm just going to do admit all.
Good morning, everybody.
Matt, I need to say something really quickly before we start.
Okay.
So everybody is aware, we do have.
Let's wait. People are still joining by audio, so let's give it 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, I think we should start.
Okay, I just want to say something really quickly. We do have Spanish translators available. You can go to the Spanish room by clicking the English room down at the bottom. And I do want to ask Anna to come in really quick, if she can do that and say that in Spanish. Anna, are you there?
I am here. I was in the Spanish channel.
Oh, okay. Can you go ahead and tell if there's anybody there if there's anybody in this room in Spanish? Okay.
So once we start, I'm just going to turn my camera off.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, okay, perfect. There's someone who speaks Spanish, but also speaks Spanish, so.
Okay, great. So we can get started then.
Okay, Kristen, as we're getting started, are we supposed to have something on the bottom of the screen that allows for Spanish for interpretation?
We have closed captioning at the bottom, and then if you click the bottom where it says, on mine it says English, but if you click it, you can click the Spanish option. So if you want to be in the English room, make sure you click English, and if you want to be in the Spanish room, click the Spanish option.
Okay, I don't have that option on the bottom of my screen.
On my screen, the button is interpretation, so you might be able to find that.
Okay, I don't have that. Can you all hear me? Yep.
Yes, we can hear you. I can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so great. Okay, so I can't hear the interpretation. I couldn't hear that conversation that was going on that you had.
Sorry. Yes, I think that's correct.
Okay, all righty. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to this question and answer session, office hours for the general plan alternatives. You know, we've had a number of these sessions. This is actually the fourth of 4 sessions that we're having. So I know we've covered a lot of ground in previous ones. I recognize some familiar faces / names here. What I'd like to actually do to start out is to go around and just do a quick round of introductions so everyone can say who they are. If folks are comfortable turning on their screen when they say hello, that would be great. If not, that's fine too. And why don't we start? So I will start. I, again, have recognized many of you. I'm Matt Ramey with Ramey Associates. We're the lead consultant on the project. Let's go through city staff next. Kristen?
Sorry, still doing things in the background. Kristen Rice, Senior Planner on the General Plan team.
I'm Ian Holtz. I'm a Senior Planner on the General Plan team as well.
I'm Kari.
Sorry?
I'm the Planning Manager. I'm also on the General Plan team.
Tabitha? Okay, we're going to skip Tabitha for a second. Alex?
My name's Alexandra, and I'm the communication
Can you hear
manager
me?
for the City of Thousand Oaks.
Okay, Tabitha, are you there?
Oh,
All right.
sorry, I'm in two separate rooms. So I'm Tabitha.
Keep
I'm
going.
the Assistant Planner on the General Plan team.
Okay, now Tabitha's wearing two hats with this. Thanks, Tabitha, for overseeing this. Okay, let's go through. I'll just sort of go through the list as I see them. Kenneth?
Hi, my name is Kenneth Yaz. I live in Newbury Park. I've been a resident of Thousand Oaks since 1993. I was on the cable committee back in the 90s and then became the chairman of the cable committee when there were various competing cable companies trying to gain a foothold in Thousand Oaks. So that was an interesting experience. Subsequent to that, I worked on making sure that $2 million worth of funds coming out of the Dos Vientos project were allocated to the improvements of the sports fields at the three high schools in the area. So that's my connection with city government, and I'm quite interested in obviously the future of Thousand Oaks, and it's obviously come a long way since I first moved here, and that's why I've taken the deep dive into all the information that you've provided on the website, and I'm now joining this last encounter with the group. I have a couple questions, but I'll remain in the audience until it's Q&A time.
Great, thank you. Peter?
Yes, I'm Pete Deredix. Currently, I am a full-time residential realtor with Century 21 Everest, which used to be Troop Real Estate. Been practicing real estate here in Ventura County for 21 years. Been a Ventura County resident since coming to California Lutheran College in 1970, and then living out at the beach communities from 1975 to about 1990, where I was a broadcaster, owning an FM radio station, 96.7 KXBS, and also being city council appointed for the Oxnard Tourism Bureau. And so my concern is about obviously the community, full-time resident here in Thousand Oaks since 1999 now, and concerned about our community and the county.
Great, thank you. Silvana?
Hi, I'm Silvana Zuka. I've been to quite a few of these. I'm just trying to understand how it all works. And I've lived here since 1972, and I just want to make sure that our city remains awesome as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, good to see you again. Let's see, Frank Miller. Did I get that right, Frank? Yeah, you're on mute. So yeah, there you go.
It's
go ahead.
Millar.
Oh, Millar, I'm sorry.
I've been a resident. That's no problem. I get it hour by hour, but anyway. I've been a resident since 1978. I've been very active in the city in many different ways, particularly Measure E. And I continue to be interested in slow growth. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Leanne?
Muted.
We can't hear you. Are you in the English room? So at the bottom, there should be an interpretation button. And if you click that, then you hit English. Okay. Leanne, we're going to come back to you. Okay. Andrew?
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name's Andrew Kuo. I am one of the heads of the Greystar office here in Los Angeles County. We're an owner-operator of residential real estate. And I will admit I am not a resident of Thousand Oaks, but we own many properties and do a lot of work in Ventura County. And see Thousand Oaks as a city we'd like to do some work in the future.
Great. Carol McNutt. I think there's a couple Carols here.
Good morning. I've lived in Thousand Oaks since 1971, and
We're actually having a very hard time hearing you. If you could turn your microphone up or speak up would be great. Can't hear you. I don't know what's going on with audio today. I can hear some of you, but not others. Carol, we're going to come back to you. Andrea? Or is it Andrea?
That's Andrea. It's fine. My name's Andrea Lux. I am on the board of the Homeowners Association in Hidden Valley Estates.
Okay. Welcome. Thanks for joining. Leanne, should we try you again? Sorry. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Oh, wait, we just heard you.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, thank you.
Now I can hear you.
Oh, that's great. That's good. I guess it just took a while for the English to kick in. So my name's Leanne Holland, and I'm a resident of Newbury Park. A fairly recent transplant, lived here since 2015, and I'm the leader of a grassroots community group called Thrive Conejo, and we are advocates for inclusive education in Conejo Valley Unified School District, particularly for students with disabilities. And so I'm really interested in issues of equity and inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. Let's see, Carol McNutt, do you want to try again? See if this works. It works for Leanne.
can you hear me now?
Yeah, speak up a little bit more. It's very faint for whatever reason.
Okay, let me get the microphone closer. How about now? No? Okay, I'll shout. Sorry, I don't know.
Well, can you just double check really quick? If you go to the bottom where it says interpretation, can you make sure that it says English and not law?
Can you hear me now?
No.
Okay,
No.
I'll shout.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. So I've lived in Thousand Oaks since 1971. And one of the first real adventures that I had was with my sister pushing our kids in their strollers to get signatures to preserve Wildwood Park. They were wanting to develop all of Wildwood Park either for homes or golf courses. So I'm a big proponent of our open spaces and slow growth, as Frank mentioned. I'm really concerned with the height of our buildings, especially because of our fire department and the other infrastructure. So I know that's supposed to be at a later date, but anyway, that's my concern. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, Jorge.
Hi, Jorge Luciani. I've been a resident of Newbury Park for over 10 years. I learned about all of these through actually the Acorn. became interested and read the alternatives and read about, I even filled the survey. And I'm attending because I said to myself, well, it's the opportunity to, I don't think that there is nothing broken in our community, but it's an opportunity to make it even better.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see, Judith, I see that you joined. You could introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Judith Guziak. I am a resident of Thousand Oaks. Originally was here in 1988, took a 4-year leave and came back in 97. I am a volunteer nurse. I volunteered for 25 years in the community with Los Robles and the free clinics. And I am very interested in finding out what is going on in our city. I was originally worked a while back on open space and with the community, and now I'm back involved in the political side and the community side.
Great, welcome. Nick.
Nick Rial, resident of Newbury Park for a little over 3 years. I'm on the General Plan Advisory Committee, and I like coming to these Q&As so that I can hear what everyone else in the city is interested in with regards to the land use alternatives.
Okay, Sean.
Good morning, Sean Rodian. I'm a lifelong resident of Thousand Oaks, president of Thousand Oaks Boulevard Association. Want to take an opportunity to listen to some of our residents' stakeholder comments and thank staff and Ramey Associates for a wonderful job they've been doing with the outreach.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Let's see, Carol Shelton.
My name is Carol Shelton, and I've lived in Thousand Oaks for about 40 years, in the 80s-ish. I am interested in learning about this and kind of diving in head first. I am on the leadership team of Thrive Conejo along with Leanne Holland, and I also serve as one of the vice presidents of Adelante Comunidad Conejo. And so I'm interested in equity and inclusion for our families. Thank you.
Thank you. Ann Foster. I think you are last. Ann, are you there? Okay, we are not hearing you. We can come back if you are able to speak. We can have you introduce yourselves. So again, thank you all for joining. This is, as some of you have mentioned, it's a really important task that the city has before it in terms of thinking about its general plan. The land use element and the land use map has really not been looked at since and comprehensively updated since 1970, when the general plan was first adopted for the city. We have, as you all know, we have a briefing book that has 3 different concepts for potential growth in the city that was developed out of the community engagement process that occurred over a year and a half. I know that some of you are new to the process, and welcome. We're glad that you're here, and we're glad that you're participating. But please know that this where we are today is a result of a year and a half of work. We welcome all comments, and we expect that the alternatives are going to shift from what we have presented. It may be one of the 3, it may be a combination of the 3, and it may have new ideas put in by the time it goes to the council, which is going to be in the spring. What we want to do today is to answer questions that you have. This is not about advocating individual points on this call. The way that we are going to be receiving feedback, the only way we are going to be receiving feedback is through the online survey, as well as any written comments associated with the briefing book that is online, which includes the map, potential changes to the map. So, you all are welcome to, free to say what you would like to say and comments that you want to make. But please know that this is not an opportunity. We are not going to be writing down the direction and reporting on the direction of the comments that are made in this meeting. It's really about answering questions. We understand that this information is really complex. There's a lot of factors that go into it. And so we're having these sessions to help people understand, given the complexity of the information. So with that, I am just going to open it up. I think if you want to say something, if you could either kind of wave and I will see you, or raise your hand, that would be great. And again, we will do our best to answer whatever questions that you have. Okay, Carol, we are ready to hear you scream again.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Well enough.
Okay, since the landowners are the ones, as my understanding goes from listening to all the presentations in the office meetings, since the landowners have the right to say, yes, I want to redevelop, or no, I don't want to redevelop, what's the percentage? When you look at the boulevard, there's so much redevelopment. So what's the percentage of the people on the boulevard that have said, yes, I want to redevelop my property? And also, when they're redeveloping, are they leaving, like, let's say, for example, where Tarantula Hill Brewery is, would they leave that existing and then build on top of it, or would they wipe it out and rebuild it?
Well, so the question is, once, and it's a really good question. It's really about how planning happens, how planning and then development happens in any city, not just Thousand Oaks. Essentially, the general plan lays out the vision for the future of the city and the broad rules on what should happen. The plan is really about vision and values with a broad direction for what can happen in different areas. And that includes a land use designation map, which identifies the allowable uses and the allowable intensity on every parcel in the city. From there, the city will update its zoning code, which identifies more specificity about the development requirements, such as open space, lot coverage, parking requirements, all of the details about what you actually see as the building on the ground. It is up to individual property owners throughout all of the tens of thousands of parcels in the city, whether it's on the boulevard or elsewhere, about whether they choose to develop or propose development on their parcels. And then when they do, they have to conform to the regulations in the zoning and in the general plan. So, the question is what percentage of parcels or how many parcels? We haven't surveyed, but if you look along the boulevard, a very small number have come forward with proposals. And that was even after the Thousand Oaks Boulevard specific plan, which was in, Kristen, help me with this, 2015. Is that when that was, in Ian, when that was adopted? So, it's been 5 years and there's only been a couple of projects that have come forward as even, potential projects. There have been a few others that have happened. And so, that's the process. Essentially, it's up to the individual landowners, but we don't know exactly how many would redevelop. And a lot, in my experience, doing planning all across the state, ultimately, it's very few that will choose to redevelop their properties. Okay, is there another question? I heard someone chiming in.
This is Sean Roddy and Matt. Oh, sorry.
Okay, actually, let's go to Peter, and then Sean, we can come back to you.
Thank you, first of all, for putting this together and giving the community a chance to communicate. One of the concerns that I have, being a lifelong Southern California resident, growing up in Pasadena initially and watching the 210 freeway being built and traveling up, the 101 when it was just a 2-lane highway and always having the construction on it. What, if any, coordination is there with the infrastructure and the extra pressure on the highways and the freeways? Our offices used to be at the corner of Thousand Oaks and Moore Park, pretty much across from Tarantula Hill Brewery. And that development really didn't have enough parking. There's no parking behind it, and it's a challenge with parking along the boulevard there. More park at Thousand Oaks, more park at Jan's, more park at Arbalest. I have a 17-year-old daughter who's a senior at Thousand Oaks High School, where our offices are now in Westlake Village at the corner of Thousand Oaks Boulevard and Westlake. When Westlake High School gets out, traffic is horrendous currently. And if you're planning on, if you figure 2 cars per household plus, you got an additional, what, 6,000 plus cars that are going to be on the road. And what type of a plan is there? And is the state planning any type of commitment to, you know, to give us enhanced infrastructure moving from one community to the other? Because whether it's Camarillo or Ventura or further down south, Westlake, as more cars are on the 101, you can't even get out of town on a Friday going north. It's like we're just seeing like we're creating a huge problem for ourselves, and we don't have an infrastructure to support it. That's my viewpoint.
Okay, is there a question embedded in that I could answer? Is there a plan?
Yeah. What resources, what changes are going to be? Because it seems like we're doing this because the state's saying, if you don't add this additional housing, we are going to withhold money for you. And yet I don't see us having the roads, whether it's highways or local, to really support these extra houses. And how are we planning to mitigate that? I don't get it.
Okay, so a couple of things. So one is that that traffic is a regional issue and not a city issue for the most part. So that the 101, whether someone a jurisdiction builds in Camarillo or Ventura or Westlake, there's people moving up and down the 101. The state is growing, and the state has been growing, and the Highway 101 is you know, and the other regional freeways are regional challenges. There is not, as you know, sufficient transit to support some of that growth. But essentially it comes down to Caltrans decisions, because 101 is a Caltrans freeway.
Well, let's talk about, you talk about the city, like the crossroad.
Sure.
Westlake
So I would actually
Boulevard,
encourage you,
which is city of
thank you. I would
right?
encourage you, Peter, I would encourage you to look at the existing conditions reports on transportation. And what we see is that there are certain areas of the city that have an impact on traffic for a small period of time. The majority of the infrastructure, the majority of the roadways are not impacted for the majority of the time. So you can look at that sort of time lapse of when it is. Clearly, as one of the ways that, right now we're talking about vision overall for the city and where growth goes, and there's different ways of allocating that growth. And once we have that, and we're looking at sort of vision, so that's full build out. Once we have that nailed down, we then go dive a little bit deeper and look at what the next 20 years might look like, which is a much more limited amount of growth for a variety of reasons. And then that's when we look at the infrastructure numbers associated with that. One of the things you mentioned is about schools. I'm sorry, I'm talking, Peter. One of the things that we mentioned about schools. Schools are a problem everywhere. When a school gets out, it's an absolute mess because everyone drives to school. There's no way around that. That happens at every school everywhere across the country. So I think that's one that it's a bitter pill to swallow, but it's a pill that we have to swallow with that. Okay, Peter, go ahead.
So what I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I was wrong, Matt, is that we're first going to build the houses and we're going to worry about traffic later.
That's not what I said. So what I said was we're in a planning process that we have right now. And so what we are doing is we are identifying potential locations and potential patterns of growth in the city. Once we have the potential patterns, we're then going to look at where we expect growth is going to go in the next 20 years, which gets into a little bit of Carol's question about how do we know who's going to build? Well, we have to kind of make predictions about that. And then what we try to do is identify where that growth is going to go, and then begin to plan infrastructure around what we predict and where we predict growth is going to go. Then associated with the development projects as they get approved, there has to be transportation analysis to make sure that you can access the area. Now, one of the things that happens when you actually look at do a general plan, a lot of times there's transportation impact fees that are associated with it, so that the city is looking overall at the transportation system, the infrastructure system, and sets impact fees in order to meet the growth that's there, and then that money gets charged to the developers in the form of impact fees.
And was I correct in understanding the numbers? Those 10-year numbers are what, 60,000 plus units?
That is incorrect.
That is an incorrect number over 10 years?
We haven't predicted that, but the number, let me just say that the number that the state for housing units that we have to identify space for, this isn't build, identify space for in case someone wants to build, is about 2,600 units. 2,600 now. So this is not a guarantee of development, and what we found is that, you know, some jurisdictions will exceed that number and some will not. Many will not. And so it is not that the city is required to build that and is required to grow in a certain way. It's that the city is required to identify an amount of space to allow housing to be built if the property owners choose to do it.
And what's your
so right now there's no guarantee of any growth.
What's your historic experience then when these spaces are identified and allotted that development does take place? Is it 90% of it happens? Is it 100%? Is it 60%?
Well, Ian, why don't you answer about what was in the last cycle, about what was identified, what we had to identify as the city, and then what was actually built.
Okay. Well, as far as what was identified, hold on a second. I need to grab that real quick. But I think I want to help people be clarified. I mean, the RHNA is 2,600 units. However, that is broken up almost into equal parts as far as affordability goes. And to carry the amount of affordable housing that's required in the RHNA, we're going to be identifying more than 2,600 units of space on the map. There's no way you can just exactly point to 2,600 units on the map and let it go, because the state will not buy it. Because, to your question, the production rate never meets what is planned for. And you know, in this last cycle, the city has built about 700 units. And when I say cycle, the housing cycle is the last 8 years. So on average, it's less than 100 units a year is what the production has been. I believe as far as what we only had to provide 255 units the last cycle. And part of that was due to, well, but we identified well over that a number of units. We had about 575 underutilized sites, and we had about 700 vacant sites. Predominantly single family lots, but you know, those were identified on a map. So, you know, so basically we produced a little bit over half in general terms, but we didn't meet any of our affordability requirements.
And so essentially the pace of development, even from when an idea happens and is presented to council to when it's approved, is a couple of years or a year. So, I mean, the pace of development, it's really slow. You said you were in real estate, so, you know, so yeah, so, you know, the way that from conception all the way through, it takes a long time, and it takes a lot of money, and it takes a lot of effort. So, you know, I think really it's important to remember that any change that's going to happen is going to be a very slow evolution over time, a very slow evolution. And so that gives time to be able to think about infrastructure as well. Okay, are there, let's see, I think, Sean, you had wanted to say something?
Yes, Matt, thank you. I just wanted to clarify, there was a question about when the specific plan was adopted. It was 2011, not 2015. So it's been in effect a little over 10 years.
Okay, and then there have only been a couple of projects. My understanding, again, this is sort of that pace of development. There's been a couple of projects that have been approved, I think 2 in like mixed use buildings, the Lupes and 299.
Yeah, within the 10 years of the specific plan's inception, which allows for mixed-use development across 3 miles of Thousand Oaks Boulevard, we are just nearly completing Lupes, which is a 1710 that's 36 units, and 299, which is across from Tarantula Hill, it's 142 units. So collectively in 10 years, less than 200 units. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Okay, are there other questions about, perhaps about the alternatives or the differences between them? Okay, are there just any general questions?
Yeah, bunch of hands up.
Oh, I might be missing. Oh, I see. I'm sorry. All right. So, Silvana.
I have just a clarification that I wanted to ask. So I think you've said that to get the RENA numbers that we need, the density has to be high. And from what I understand, there's 2 parts to that, I think. Part of the reason is that high density incentivizes the builder, so as you've said, it pencils out. But then I think there was another part of it, and I don't remember what that was. Or is that the only reason? Does that make sense?
So I guess a couple of things. So, the overall, the state through a lot of this is focusing on what the state is saying to do. And I think there's a lot of other thoughts and concepts that go into the city itself and where the city wants to grow and how it pays for its services and what the vision is and what's going on with retail that we haven't discussed yet, which are, I think, more important than the state saying you have to do a certain number of units. But what you're asking about is a couple of things. So one is that with the RENA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, which is that 2,600 units, it allocates those into different affordability levels, very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. And for the very low and the low, you need to have a minimum density. You need to allow a minimum of 30. You need to allow 30 units an acre to be developed, and that's the state's proxy for affordability.
So you cannot have, if I were a landowner, couldn't I choose to make it very low and have it not be so dense? I mean, I guess
sure, but you're not going to be able to, unless you're an affordable housing developer who has lots of money, then from outside sources, you're not going to be able to build it.
So it just ties into the first part of that, which is it doesn't pencil out.
That's correct. So even at 30 units an acre.
So it has to be 30 units because it pencils out, but also there's a state mandate on it.
There's two separate things going on with this. So one is you need to allow 30 units an acre to meet the RENA requirements. So that's one. Okay. The other is that as densities increase, it becomes easier to build the project. Now, if you all remember, if you haven't actually seen this, there were presentations that we gave at the General Plan Advisory Committee, I think it was in February of last year, which showed that building form and density are 2 very different things. So there's a number of density, a density number, which is different than what a building looks like. you can have small units in a small building and it can be very high density. And so we see that a lot with like senior housing, where you see 3-story senior housing projects, which are, you have low parking requirements and very small units, and the densities are 100 units an acre. So, you know, and then some of it is how big is the lot that goes into that, because the density is based on the lot size. So if you have a lot that, for example, on Thousand Oaks Boulevard that goes up into the hills, but you can't build on part of that, you know, your effective density is low, even if you might have a bigger building. Or you could have a smaller building on a small lot. So there's a lot of factors that go into it, which is why we always encourage folks to look at the form and character of the building and rather than the density number, because most people, when they look at a building, have no idea what the density is. Myself included. Like, it's almost impossible to look at a building and understand what the density of that building is. So, you know, I think you would then want to think about what is it that you want to achieve in the city. If you want to achieve affordability and you want to have a diversity of housing types, you need to enable those things to happen. And we've heard a lot in the process that people want to allow at least some diversity of housing in the city. They want it to remain predominantly single family, but to enable a diversity of housing so that people who work in the city can also live in the city. Right now, there's an incredible mismatch between who can work in the city, who works in the city, and who can afford to live here. And that actually, Peter, that goes to your point about transportation and people on the roadways. So there's a lot of people on the roadways who are living in Camarillo and Oxnard who come into the city to work because they cannot afford to live here. So again, there are all of these factors that sort of relate to one another that address these issues, and we have to look at them, and that's the complicating aspect of this, because we have to look at these issues holistically. Okay, Silvana, Peter, I'm going to have to come back to you because we have other people who have their hands up. Silvana, did you want to ask a follow-up question about that?
Thanks. No, it's just, yeah, that's okay. Thanks.
Okay. Kenneth. Actually, yes, Kenneth, you're next.
Hi, Matt. This relates to Measure E because I'm looking at, I was looking at and heard your community workshop back on February 2nd. And one of the slides on Measure E says no net increase in residential capacity of commercial land area above 1996 general plan use map. In reality, though, the Measure E deals with voter approval for any of these. If you wanted to increase or decrease residential capacity or commercial capacity, it really requires voter input, does it not?
Ian, I'm going to let you answer that.
Well, if you increase the overall capacity, it does. So the overall capacity for the entire city is roughly 81,000 units. So as long as the land uses, you know, the acreage of the different land use categories do not exceed that capacity in any kind of shape or form, you do not need to go to a vote of the people.
Right. And I'm assuming that would put a damper on any effort to increase that capacity, is the fact that you'd have to put it to a vote at the city level. I mean, I'm assuming that, you know, the Measure E attempts to restrict that or prevent any changes in that by requiring that amendment be approved by the voters. So that it would seem to me that would discourage any effort to make a change, according to Measure E. Just trying to, you know, read between the lines on Measure E and understand what it really means. What is the purpose?
Well, yeah. Sorry, Kenneth, I interrupted you.
Go ahead.
So you know what? I'll just tell you sort of what our approach was overall, which is, as Ian said, that we looked based on attorney interpretations. We look at Measure E as an overall cap of the number of units, and so that number, as Ian said, is 81,124 units based on the analysis done by staff from the 1996 land use plan. Right now, there's 48,000. There's 48,000 housing units in the city. Mm-hmm. You know, we can't decrease the number of units because of state law. We can't increase it because of Measure E. So we're really trying to hit 81,124. The question is essentially where does that go? The other piece is that I don't think anyone here thinks that this city is going to grow to 81,000 housing units. Cities, that's a theoretical build out of the city. That is not something that we ever think is going to happen.
Matt, where did that figure come from?
Which figure?
81,124 housing units.
There's a, if you go on the website, there is a analysis done by city staff in, I believe it was 2017, looking at essentially theoretical build out of the city that was reviewed and approved by the
That's purely a theoretical number. Is that correct? That's
purely a theoretical, and that's all that we're talking about. And you know, it's been 81,184 since the city was, you know, incorporated, and look where we are now. Like, I don't think, again, these are theoretical build out numbers that are never going to be achieved. Every city has a theoretical build out number that's never going to be achieved. So the question really becomes the sort of realistic build out, which goes again to, you know, Carol's very insightful question at the beginning about, okay, what does it actually take to develop something and who's going to develop? And that is a much, much, much smaller number that happens over a long period of time.
Understood. I have another
okay,
question.
And it's complicated. Yeah.
It is complicated. I have another question, but I'll wait until the end, until everybody's spoken. But continue, please. Thank you.
Okay, Leanne, you are next.
Thank you. So forgive me if this is a rather naive question, but I'm still very new to this process and figuring things out.
There's no such thing. Don't worry about it.
So I'm just wondering, and trying to, as a newbie, trying to look at and evaluate these land use alternatives, I'm wondering if there are examples of other cities that we have looked to who have done a really good job at balancing sort of the preservation of the community that exists, that people, you know, that people love here in Thousand Oaks, while also doing a really great job of creating that equity planning and affordable housing and making space for those in our community who have been historically underserved and marginalized.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of communities that have done that. I think the question of are they successful is really in the eye of the beholder, and some people will say yes and other people will say no, right? So, you know, so what I think as an example might not actually be what other people think as an example. So I'm always sort of hesitant to give an example of like, this is a great example because someone's like, no, that was terrible. So, you know, it is, you know, a lot of times what we as planners try to do, which is to, and that's what the general plan is about. The general plan is really about preserving what is great in the community and what is wonderful and addressing the challenges that we have. And one thing we know about cities is that they are not, that they change. Cities always change, whether they evolve, whether they're evolving in a positive direction or a negative direction, they're always evolving, or a neutral direction, they're always evolving. And the question that we have before us is how can this city evolve in a way that meets the, you know, that preserves the things that you all love about the community, the character of the single family neighborhoods, the general low scale, the open space, you know, while addressing some of these concerns that Peter brought up about traffic congestion and how people move around and affordability and access, right? So that's really the balance that we have, and every city is unique and different, and every city does it differently. So I'm a little hesitant, but there are plenty of places that do this. It's pretty common, a common approach to really look at the single family areas and generally try and keep them as they are, and then focus development in mixed use or multifamily development at 3 to 4 stories in a smaller area of the city, because it brings people close together, it reduces driving, it increases access, it increases the average cost of the house is lower in those areas, or the rent is lower compared to a house. So, you know, there's a lot of communities that have done that.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Andrew.
Thanks, Matt. I've got a sort of 2-part question, one more general and then one more specific. In, you know, reviewing the alternative land use plans, is there an opportunity to adjust any of these three as this process moves forward with, both the Planning Commission and City Council. I ask because, we actually believe very strongly there are opportunities for housing that are actually quite suitable for residential uses that currently aren't identified as such in these alternatives, and the zoning proposed in the alternatives wouldn't allow for those uses.
Yeah. So, and this is, Andrew, not just for you, but for everyone. We have these three alternatives. Each alternative has, we've looked at it separately by each of these essentially 5 sub areas. The survey asks questions to kind of tease out what people's direction is and what they want to see for those different sub areas. We then take all of that information and try to pull it together to create a preferred alternative, which is, it may be one of the 3 of those. Much more likely, it's going to be a combination of the 3 plus suggestions that people have had that aren't in any of the 3 alternatives. And the best way for folks to provide those comments is to go to the maps on the which are part of the briefing book, and to identify specific parcels or areas if you have a different vision, if you see something in all of the alternatives generally that you don't think should be that way, you can mark it on the map and we will see all of those comments. So if you think there's a place where there could be housing, go ahead into that map and do that. If others see places where you think there shouldn't be housing, go in on the map and mark that and we will look at those.
Okay, that's very helpful. Okay. And then I guess more specifically, in reviewing the alternatives, how did you all sort of assess and view the easternmost change area with regard to residential opportunities? That was one where currently zoned a little bit more industrial, and a lot of the housing opportunities were left to the other change areas.
Yeah, well, so what we heard, so there are opportunities for housing overall on the eastern side of the city that we have presented in the different alternatives. We did look, the other, so they're there. The other is that having a robust job economy and a significant number of jobs in the city was one of the other pieces that came out, one of the other concepts that came out of the public process, and a lot of the ideas that evolved were essentially thinking about the city almost like a dumbbell in a way, where you have Rancho Conejo has a very heavy jobs focus, and then the east side has areas with a heavy jobs focus. And so we wanted to make sure that the city wasn't only kind of moving to residential, and we weren't taking away the job producing lands to be able to provide housing. We thought that there were areas that were acceptable for housing that would produce a lot of benefits, while also we wanted to make sure that we preserved those job producing areas, because that's one of the main ways of tax revenue coming into the city. Like I said, if you have specific comments or suggestions, then I would go ahead and mark those, and we can take those into consideration.
Definitely, and I'll provide some of those comments in the document. And just one last note: you're probably aware the Baxter office site that's currently zoned for industrial will be going in front of council tonight for a pre-screen, and that's sort of consistent with other sites we've reviewed in that general area, and that there's sort of excess undeveloped, underused land that's available, and for which, for a variety of reasons, new industrial or retail don't make sense and aren't necessarily feasible. I'm just curious whether you guys are, taking live, feedback, and such that would this pre-screen pass change your view just in terms of that general area, right? If new housing is now being proposed.
Well, as you know, a pre-screen is not an approval of that. It's just the ability to move forward and for the city to consider it. So, I think we would need to get direction from the city and the city council on that particular property about how we should address that. So ultimately, I think what we're going to do in our process is this is very much a public process where it's driven by the comments that we have received and heard overall by the public. And, there's thousands of people who have participated in this process. And we have, I believe 400 plus who have already responded to the survey. So, we will then take that and put it forward. And ultimately, it's the City Council, Planning Commission and City Council's decision on what to do with our recommendations on what we've heard, and then other things such as pre-screens.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep. Okay, Peter, you had your hand up next. You were next in line.
Yeah.
And then Frank.
So I guess my question is a little bit twofold, is that obviously Westlake and Thousand Oaks are so intertwined, and with the development, and I understand that some of the proposed redevelopment is on the Townsgate section of Thousand Oaks, correct? Looking at rezoning some of that?
So are we looking at, so it is an alternative that we put forward to test whether people think it's actually viable for residential or mixed use, or whether it should stay as industrial in sort of its current capacity, or whether the intensification should actually stay as jobs, but maybe allow some more intense jobs.
And this is all posed to responses on the survey and things like that, which I'm glad has been mentioned several times, and I can alert people as well that I work with to add into that regard. So I guess the question is there any coordination between the two cities, between Westlake and Thousand Oaks, as far as things are moving forward, since we are so interrelated? Some people think that they're buying a property in Westlake when they're actually buying a property in Thousand Oaks, just because it has a Westlake Village address.
Ian, Kristen, Kari, do you guys want to respond to that?
Well, I mean, we have not coordinated with them. I mean, I think at this point, their land use patterns, they do join the areas of, some of the suggested changes as well. However, I would, I've looked at their land use map, but no, we have not consulted with them. So.
All right, that gives me some clarity there.
And actually, let me just, and I don't think, and they're not updating their general plan right now. So typically, like when cities are, kind of maybe on a same cycle, there's a bit more coordination. But obviously, they will, as adjacent jurisdiction throughout the process, whether, when we release the EIR, we're going to be soliciting input from all the adjacent jurisdictions as well as the county. So, they can comment obviously from an environmental standpoint as well.
Correct. And affordability has been mentioned so often. The reality is we live in an upscale community. Currently, the median list price in Thousand Oaks is $900,000. The median price in California is $700,000. The median price in the United States is $320,000. So we're close to 3 times the median price of a home. And so affordability, what are the percentages for moderate income and low income on, let's say, the 2,600? Is it like 10% low income, another 10% moderate? So we have 20% of the build out for those properties, for those households?
The numbers are a lot higher. And hold on a second. Let me pull it up. I have it quickly here. So, out of the 2,600, 733 have to be very low. Actually, very low. So 30% or less of the average median income for the county.
Okay.
493 have to be in the low income category.
Okay.
And then you have about 531 in the moderate and 858 at above moderate, which is market rate. Now, actually, the final number just got released, and we anyways, we gained 6 units. So those numbers may not, these are all based on the old 2,615 number, and now it's 2,621. So, but you get the general gist of.
Well, those are significant. Those are significant numbers. Absolutely. Now, are these categories going to be in perpetuity, or are they also going to be like the properties at Holly Grove were, and over there on Hidden Canyon, to where after 20 years or so, all will be able to go to market levels?
So can I just jump in? This is the difference between planning and building. What you are talking about, Peter, is a built project. What we are talking about with this is a planning to allow for the space for someone to come in and build.
Okay. All right. So we don't know the answer to that at this point. Okay.
No, we don't know. And essentially, this is where it gets to the individual decisions. People can come in and maybe none of it's going to be affordable, and maybe all of it will be affordable. We don't know, because this is what happens in the building process later on. So, you know, as we know, affordable housing is very difficult to build. It takes many, many different sources to build just straight up affordable housing.
And Peter, sorry if I may just add a little bit of color. Typically, you know, affordable housing can be built in 2 sort of distinct manners. One, pure play, 100% affordable housing projects, which, as Matt pointed out, are difficult to build without some significant source of subsidies or financing from municipalities, either local, state, federal. Typically, those projects are funded through tax credits, and you need to hold those for at least 15 years. And then, you know, following that, you're free to, you know, operate it as you wish. That's hard to do, particularly as you may have read, the state of California doesn't always put its, you know, funding to good use or the most efficient use. The other way to do it is inclusionary affordable housing. So a lot of the projects may have seen recently go in front of city council are, you know, proposed 200 unit projects or so that will include some percentage of affordable, dedicated for, typically it's under a covenant of 50 years. But that's the real way affordable housing can get built in large numbers. And the other part of it is you try and propose 100% affordable housing projects, like a very low income project somewhere in Thousand Oaks, you're going to also get a ton of pushback from the folks surrounding that project. So that's also a tough road, especially in a city like Thousand Oaks. So as Matt pointed out, there's a lot of levers, a lot of different forces at play. And if you need to meet 700 low income units in an 8-year period, you, as Ian pointed out, you almost need to plan for a lot more than that if you think a lot of those affordable units are going to be coming from inclusionary housing projects, which will require an additional amount of market rate units.
Well, great information. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, Frank, thank you for your patience. You are still on mute. Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I have construction going on here. I don't know how productive I can be in the meeting. But I do want to get back to this business of 81,000 units. I'd like to know, Ian, were you there at the 2017 meeting where the 81,000 was reported from planning?
No, I was not, but I have time and time again gone back to those meetings, either listened and read the reports and actually dove into the information. So the 81,000 number was the number that was released at that time, and that was based on staff's evaluation, a bit more of a precise evaluation of the 96 land use plan using GIS.
Right, and this is exactly what I'd like to get to right now, is that once again you are mentioning a number of 81,000, and it always needs to be, shall we say, annotated every time it's mentioned, that nobody, as we have already earlier in this meeting, no one believes that that's the capacity of the city. And yet, as a number that is, shall we say, without foundation, as a useful number, it's being used by the city for all kinds of planning goals. And it's been published in the paper, and it's being used in this meeting as a reference. And I'm very concerned about this, because it is possible to go to the trouble of figuring out what the actual capacity of the city is, and yet we're using a number that's not a number that we should be using. So my question is, do you agree, and what is your comment on that position that I'm espousing?
Ian, can I jump in?
Sure.
So that's not, I'm sorry, that's an advocacy question. It's not really a question to help with the understanding of this. You know, again, we have done the analysis. There's build out and there's growth projections. Build out is a theoretical number. Every city has a theoretical build out, which is never going to be reached. We have it for commercial, we have it for industrial, we have it for retail, we have it for residential. There's a theoretical number which is based on the maximum that you can build. What we need to do is allow that through the not that it's ever going to be built, but allow that through the planning process for a variety of reasons. That's what we have to do, and then plan for projected growth in a 20-year time period. So,
okay, Matt,
is there a question we can answer?
And Frank, actually, if I may, you know, just to quickly respond, I mean, not advocacy, but just to tell it how it is. I mean, staff was directed to do an analysis of Measure E by the City Council, because over the years, you know, you're trying to allocate units out of the pool, and there was never this exhaustive exercise of determining, well, what is the actual capacity? So staff was directed to do that. They came back to council and they presented the information. And that's where the 81,000 was essentially, by virtue of going to council with this analysis, was the number that the council acknowledged was associated with Measure E. You know, Measure E, again, I mean, it's advocacy. It's a voter initiated thing. And the city has basically had time and time again had to do interpretation. The city attorney's office can weigh into that, but the number has been vetted through a process, a public process, and recognized by the city council. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Jorge, you are next.
Who? Hi. My question is, and let me preface my question. I know very little. I'm just a resident, so I know very little. And, you know, my question be very naive. But when we were talking about affordability and, you know, those very low and blah blah blah, you know, different groups, is it talking about own properties or rentals or both, or it doesn't matter?
Good question. That is not a naive question. So in the general plan, we plan for housing units. Typically, it is rental housing. Building affordable for sale housing is much more difficult to do. So typically, and this is again what we've seen, is that it's rental housing with that. The general plan cannot, and the city cannot dictate whether a building built should be a condo in terms of for sale housing or whether it should be rental housing. Do you have Jorge, do you have a follow-up? Okay. You are breaking up, your connection is breaking up quite a bit. So if you want to have a follow-up question, go ahead and raise your hand. Let's see, Kenneth, you're next.
By the way, just as a point of reference, oh, there he is.
No, that's it. Thank you.
This is
No,
a
I
point of
don't have a
reference.
follow-up question. I don't have a
Okay, Jorge, your connection is very, very weak.
Thank you so much.
The lightsaber is showing.
Thank you. Okay.
Just as a
Go ahead, Kenneth.
Just as a point of reference, there is a PowerPoint presentation that speaks directly to this analysis. You can search it out on the website. Slide number 23 is the conclusion. The methodology for achieving that number is not indicated. That apparently was staff's recommendation. It's slide number 23, and that's where a big figure is of 81,124 is indicated. And that's based on, and that occurred in 2017, 10/24/17. If you want to go to that, you can see how they came, roughly how they came to that conclusion. But apart from that, I have a question concerning process, Matt, and how this thing moves forward. You've been at this with the City of Thousand Oaks. I'm assuming your engagement began with your company began back in 2019 or so, about 2 years ago. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and you've gone through a number of steps in order to get to this point now. Canvassing the city in a number of different ways to gather up all this information. The 3 recommendations that are on the table now can be evaluated and commented upon when you go to the survey, correct? And all the associated material that leads up to the survey, and you'll be taking that information and sifting through it. But one thing I noticed, you were quoted in the Acorn as saying, you're not going to necessarily recommend to the city council prior to April, I would imagine. Between now and April, you're going to come to a conclusion that represents essentially one recommendation that essentially coalesces the 3 plus additional information that you're gathering between now and then. And that's the recommendation you're going to make to the city council. Is that correct?
We are going to go through a process, and we're still refining what the specifics of that. But essentially what we are going to do is take all of the information, identify where we think there is consistency, or directionality. There's never going to be consensus, as we hear from, I'm sure, this call. But what we want to get is, is where do we feel like that there's directionality from what the community is saying, and where do we feel like that there's options. And so we're going to pull that together, and then we're going to bring that to basically back to the General Plan Advisory Committee, and then I believe we're going to take it to ask for input from the Planning Commission, and then we're going to come up with what is a preferred. Then we're going to take that back out to the public for comments on that, and then it's going to go again to the Planning Commission and then the City Council. So there's a series of steps of what's going to happen, and we have been rethinking this to make sure that there's as much community engagement as we can get into the process.
Makes sense.
Before it goes to council. So, and I would just say, right now, we're going to have, thousands of comments that we're going to have to go through. And so we're going to do our best to, again, find directionality, find commonality. What we want to do is basically, even if there's a minority direction that we hear, a minority kind of preference, we want to highlight that and daylight that. So we're not going to ignore and just say, well, 51% of people said something, so we're ignoring the rest. Like, there's an example of, it's 50-50 and there's an option here, and we're going to sort of give the option, move that forward and get input on that, and maybe try and refine it a little bit more. So this is, what we're looking at here is very, and I'm glad you asked this question. It's very broad strokes of, like, you could put stuff here or you could put stuff here, and what do you like better, and what, right? And then we're going to just keep narrowing that down, and looking at the numbers and looking at the character and getting feedback. So it is a very iterative process. I know it seems really linear and you must choose now, like, or else, but really that's not how, and I apologize, like we're under a timeline from the state for some of this, but what we really want to do is make this really an iterative process and get feedback as we go along, which is why we're having all of these meetings for understanding and to hear what people say. So again, I think that what sort of comes out of this sausage making machine, so to speak, is not necessarily going to look exactly like one of these alternatives. It's going to look different. We're taking concepts in, just for example, in this process that we've had so far, we've heard more people actually, and Leanne was on this call last night, so she can sort of attest to this. We've heard more people have a little bit of a preference for maybe we actually want to allow some duplex or triplex in some of the traditional single family neighborhoods. Previously in the process, we were hearing like, no, nothing, right? And now we're hearing maybe some people want it, right? So we're hearing some different things. So we're going to have to adjust along the way based on what we're hearing.
And once ultimately you distill this information to the point where you
make Leanne agrees with me that that's what was said. Whether that's a preference overall in the community or whether it was just what some people expressed, we don't know. But again, we're hearing that's a little bit different than what we had heard before. So we're going to change and react to that.
Well, I'm confident that based on the abundance of information you're gathering and your experience at doing this, because you've been at it for quite a while, this is your forte. The recommendation or the presentation to the City Council will give them plenty to think about. And then I'm assuming, and that's going to happen in April, from what I understand. I mean, there is kind of a general deadline as to when you're going to.
It's going to be later than that, actually. I think it's ultimately going to be May when we go to the council.
At which point the City Council receives the information, evaluates it, deliberates it, perhaps provides for public comment, as they typically do at City Council meetings. I'm not altogether sure if this is subject to that. I would hope it would be to some degree. And then they make a decision, and that decision becomes the new land use guidelines. No,
not yet.
Then.
I know, if only this were like totally simple. So part of what we're doing is we need, for the housing element work, which has a state deadline, we need to have the land use map nailed down enough to be able to identify the parcels which are going to be as identified as housing element parcels, so to speak. So we need to have the map nailed down enough so that we can move forward with that. And we need a really good direction. Mm-hmm. We fully expect that as we move forward in the process, from there to writing the plan into the adoption, there's going to be tweaks to the land use map as well as the policies that are going to be coming forward. So we can't take if the city takes a full drastic shift from May until say October and everything changes, that creates problems for the work that we've done on the housing element.
Sure.
But we expect that there's going to be some shifts that happen in the land use decisions as we move spring, summer, and fall.
Okay.
Because there are some things that we just can't resolve. For example, some of the industrial areas and whether they're higher intensity or lower intensity, some of those things can kind of shift without much impact overall on the plan itself.
Mm-hmm. And there will come a point, however, where a vote will be taken. There will be new land use designations, and those become an amendment to the general plan, and therefore are kind of carved in stone.
It becomes a new general plan. So this is a comprehensive update to the general plan. So the old general plan is going to be superseded by what we do. However, and Kristen Rice has led this, which is going into the existing general plan and pulling out all of the pieces and all of the policies. And then we look at other plans that have been done and other work that's been done over the years, and we pull that in. So, in a sense, it's a little bit like the public process we're doing, where we're pulling from all of these different resources and trying to triangulate what it is that the direction is. And then that's what goes to the council. Once the council adopts that, and that adoption is going to also have an environmental impact report, which is going to deal with all of, water and traffic and all of these other issues. And then that is going to be, once that is done, that is going to be adopted, and that is going to be the new land use plan for the city.
So we have a way to go, so to speak.
We do have a way to go. I mean, it realistically, the plan will not come before the council for another year.
Okay.
The full plan.
Mhm.
Okay, Carol, you have been
Thanks for
patiently
the
waiting it.
timeline.
No, you know, and we.
It's an arduous process. It takes a while.
Yeah, and you know, this had come up at previous meetings, and we're working on this, but you know, actually kind of mapping out some of these decisions over the next year and where there's the opportunity for public input, because we have done our plan, you know, and our process to listen to people and to talk to people, and there's never as many people participating as you want, despite all of the outreach that we've done. But what we want to make sure we're doing is clearly communicating what the flow is and then what those opportunities are for input, because I think that would help you guys out a lot.
And finally, Matt, in your experience, and obviously you've done this before, is the timeline for the city of Thousand Oaks to adopt these measures typical of what you've experienced in the past with other cities and municipalities? This is about right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you really can't do this in under 2 years. Like if you get everything done in 2 years, it's lightning fast.
Okay.
And some cities have actually taken 10 to 15 years.
This sets land use requirements for anybody who wants to come in and build, but certainly doesn't necessarily encourage or discourage building. That happens after the plan's been adopted. Because as one of the participants mentioned, there is something coming before the city council tonight concerning a rather large parcel of land formerly owned by Baxter Pharmaceuticals that could end up in a couple hundred units. But I guess that's, from what I'm hearing from Ian and others, that's very much in the preliminary stages. You know, that's an ongoing issue, and so that doesn't really fall in this category.
Right. We would love to, like, as planners, so that it's easier for us to do our work, we would love to just like say, okay, stop other activities happening in the city now while we're doing the plan. But it doesn't work that way. And in fact, what ends up happening is we see, as things happen, we start seeing where there's interest and where there isn't. Mm-hmm. And some of these decisions, you know, like tonight's decision, is going to be informative for us about how the council is thinking and what the community is thinking about some of these concepts. Mm-hmm. So it actually is helpful for us, but it's you know, it's a bit of a moving target.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because the process is really important to understand. Mm-hmm. Okay, Carol.
Since this is all, I mean, I know that the general plan has to be reviewed every so many years, but because the state is telling us, you know, that we have to do this, I'm wondering where in that, like you were talking about broad strokes and funneling down to the final thing, where in that process then does the state start withholding, like you were talking about, they're withholding funds. Like if we don't get done what they want, they're going to be withholding funds. So where in the process does that happen?
Well, that's related to the house. So I guess there's two things. So one is I'm going to answer the question literally, and then I'm going to answer it broadly. So I apologize. So literally, it's the state. You need to meet. October is when the deadline is for adopting the housing element that is reviewed and certified by the Housing and Community Development Department at the state. However, there is a grace period which goes until mid-February of 2022. So it's really pre-February 2022, and it's after that time where, if you haven't done it, is when you're out of conformance with the state regulations. The other piece is, you know, this really isn't happening because the state is saying to do a housing element. This is happening because the city has a 50-year-old plan, and the city has changed dramatically in that time. And there are new state regulations, but there are also new challenges that the city is facing that you need to plan for. Housing in 1970 in the state was very different than housing in 2021. We were in balance in terms of housing and population in 1970, and over time, the state has really gone out of balance. And you know, the numbers that were said previously about the average cost in the state and the city compared to the country are pretty indicative of some of the challenges that we have with housing. There's other things as well. There's sustainability goals, there's climate change, there's a desire for equity, for access. So these are all of the things that we need to think about. We have a significant amount of retail in the city that is really not viable retail into the future. So what happens to those parcels? Do they just sit as vacant retail parcels if retail is not coming back in the way that it has been in the past? You know, what happens to those parcels? And then how do you actually take all of this and make sure that the whole package of what's happening in the city produces the revenues needed in order to provide all of the public services that you want in the future? So like that's, yes, we have the state who's telling us that we have to do this one specific thing, but this project is much broader than that. And that's the challenge with it, of trying to think about this broader picture and the connections between those. So that was the question you didn't ask. So I apologize. But it's part of the big picture thinking that we have. I mean, we're dealing with the nuance of state regulation, and then we're dealing with the big picture, and we have to look at both of them. Okay. That was my soapbox. I apologize. I'll step down now. More questions?
Matt?
Yes.
Sorry. I just want to add a couple points of clarification too, to expand on some of the previous responses. One is with regards to the 81,000 number. That you talked about it in the context of Measure E, but it's also, there's state law provisions that also say that the cities cannot reduce the number of units that are available. It's a no net loss provision. So we needed to have that analysis to meet both of those components, if you will. I just wanted to clarify that. So it's more than the cap, it's also the bottom as well. It's confusing, but it's a state law requirement. The second thing I wanted to expand on is to address the infrastructure questions. So as Matt mentioned and Ian mentioned, there will be an environmental impact report that evaluates impacts, including infrastructure, of this preferred alternative. And in that process, if there are deficiencies that are identified, the city has a capital improvement program that is updated regularly, that will, through the Public Works Department, that will address any of those major deficiencies or things that may even cause there to be reasons to change some of the proposed land use. So that all feeds into this final discussion and the final direction that we go with the final general plan as it moves forward through the long process ahead of us. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Kari, for clarifying. Let's see, Lourdes, Anna, are there any questions from the Spanish-speaking room?
I will ask.
And I think I'm only getting part of the sound, so Kristen, you might have to help me out here.
I will help you.
I'm in the English channel. If anybody's hearing me, I will ask again in the Spanish channel.
I'm not seeing any more hands up. Are there any more questions or thoughts? Is there anything else we can help you out with? Does anyone have any jokes they want to share? No.
Sure. Why don't ants get sick?
I don't know. Why?
Well, because they have antibodies.
Oh, my daughter's going to love that one. I will definitely tell her. Thank you.
Matt, could I ask a quick question?
Yeah. After our brief interlude, yes.
Yes. We all come down from hilarity. I could easily identify parcels of land in my neck of the woods in Newbury Park off of the 101 freeway at Borchard that are unused, either within walking distance from me or a couple miles away. The Kmart parcel comes to mind. There's a parcel behind that at one time was a drive-in movie theater. off of East Kelly Road. Both of which would seem prime for development. Are there restrictions on properties like that? When I go into the survey, can I identify those as being potential areas for development? Because they certainly look like prime opportunities for builders. In other words, are there parcels of land in the city that are vacant right now that are restricted, that cannot be used, that cannot fall under land use for either commercial, particularly residential development?
Well, ultimately, if it's private property, we need to put a designation on that. As you might expect, we can't put a you can't build here designation on it on private property, because that takes away the full value of the property. It's a regulatory taking, and we're not allowed to do that. Yes, there are, you're highlighting the fact that there are some parcels that are much more likely to be redeveloped than other parcels, which gets to this point about full build out versus growth projections. So I would say, yes, if you think that there are areas that you think could be redeveloped, I would look at those parcels, or do you think really could be because they're vacant or they're underutilized, the Kmart, for example, and look at those parcels and look at what the different options are and see whether those options meet your vision for what you think should be there. If one of the three options on a specific parcel doesn't meet your vision, annotate it and tell us what you think it should be. And then in terms of the specific parcels, if you think there are specific parcels that could be redeveloped, that's this growth projection phase that we're going to move into, which is once we have the vision, we're then going to look based on what the vision is about what the likelihood of redeveloping those parcels is. And it's more art than science with that, which is, which ones do we think could be built? We're going to look at those, and then we know that all of them aren't, so we're going to take a percentage of that, and that's how the growth projections, and that's how we're going to look at what the 20-year growth.
The reason I bring it up is that particular parcel behind the Kohl's department store actually provides walking access of all things, the ability to walk to a number of different shops, including a Smart and Final supermarket, in a commercial development in a shopping center that's at the moment half vacant, which means that if that parcel was developed at some point in time, it might stimulate the leasing of that commercial space as well. In other words, it could bring the whole community up. And oddly enough, it just so happens it's within walking distance. It wouldn't necessarily have to be designed that way. Frankly, it already is that way. So, and I'll make it that, when I.
We have that parcel. That parcel is certainly on our radar.
Oh, okay.
It is one of the more likely, is one of the more underutilized parcels, yes, and it is advantageous for all of the reasons that you said. I don't know any specifics about whether there's constraints on it, if there's easements on the property, or pollution, or that. We don't know that. I don't know that. But yeah, those are the kinds of things that we look at in this phase. What you should look at now is, does the vision in the alternatives, does that work? Do you think that's the appropriate use for that?
There were contemplated uses of that parcel that I'm aware of over the past 27 odd years, including a senior center. It was kind of a real estate football that was being kicked around within the city. But oddly enough, in that period of time, and that's a considerable span of time, it's never been developed. Oddly.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the the other piece of development. You have some actually rather large parcels in the city that are very either undeveloped or underdeveloped, that have never developed.
And relatively close to important shopping centers, for food and other things that, yes, you'd probably require a car to get there for some of them, but nonetheless, they're quite accessible. They're not all that far away. So I'll make a note of it when I go over the survey, which I'm just about to undertake. I'm getting ready to do it. So I'll make reference to those.
Okay, great. Thank you. And others on the call, if you think that there's an area, a specific parcel that you think could be redeveloped, or could have a different use on it, or improvements, then definitely mark that in the maps, and we'll look at that. Okay. Any follow-up questions? If not, we can cut out a little bit early. I think. Can we, Kristen? Ian, Kari?
I'm a little nervous to cut out a little bit early just in case somebody drops on.
It seems that I've just noticed, Ian, you were nodding kind of knowingly regarding Matt and I discussing that particular piece of land, that tract. Are you familiar with it? It sounds like you've had some exposure to it.
Yes, I am. And actually, yeah, you're right. It's been kicked around. I dug up an old housing study that was done, directed by the council, I think back in 2003 or 2004. And they had identified that for multifamily housing, and there was a concept and everything. So, and it's a site that I've looked at as far as identifying, you know, for a housing opportunity site. And, you know, that's very much why it's, you know, when you look at the alternatives, it's got a different designation than the institutional designation right now, which is, you know, you're very limited with what you could do with that designation today. So.
Do those limitations also apply to the plot of land across the street that used to be the Public Works facility and is behind the continuation school? The building was preserved for historical purposes. Behind there's an enormous piece of land that used to be Public Works. It's now up on Rancho Conejo. Is that not under consideration because the city owns it?
You're talking about the timber school?
I'm sorry, I'm looking at the map, but.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah, it's really funny actually looking at Ian look over his shoulder because the map of the city is the aerial of the city is behind him.
That's
correct. And so it's like he's looking at it, but he's really looking at a map on his wall.
Yeah, I'm looking at a beach. But so my question regards, you know, use of properties that are essentially owned by the city, and I believe the Public Works facility that used to be on that plot of land behind the continuation school and the piece of land that is on the other side of the continuation school that was essentially its playground, are those eliminated from consideration because they're owned by the city or the school?
No, they're not. And actually, a timely question because I have to evaluate any surplus land that the city has for the purposes of reporting. So, and yeah, I think when we looked at the alternatives, we didn't do a full evaluation, but I think there was a lot of information that, you know, as far as existing land uses and so forth that was provided. So
there are all kinds of retail shops, restaurants, and so forth that front onto Newbury Road that are within walking distance of both pieces of land. I mean,
oh yeah,
it's just kind of an ideal location because of what's already there in terms of retail space. Anyway,
sure,
I'll make a note of it.
Yeah, please do.
Of course.
Let's see. I thought I saw a hand up, but now I don't see it. Okay, so if anyone has something else they want to ask, then just jump in.
On one of the maps that I had seen is that there's property that's falling into consideration in Conejo Oaks, correct? Some of the larger lots and things like that. That as far as the for adding additional housing, and I guess my question is that would that then mean that those larger lots could be split and some designations be, you know, put into there? You're saying you can't force a property owner to, you know, to sell the property or make it available. It just changes what the property owner could potentially do with it. Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And do you have a, you know, a specific question about an
Well, it's just
area,
interesting because not familiar with that area. You have the way that the houses are on there. It would definitely change the density because it's primarily one house on a large lot, and then you would just create it to where it would be like, I guess, subdivided or something, or maybe like potentially the interesting comment that he had made that duplexes or triplexes have now been welcomed into certain areas. It would somewhat change the nature of that community.
Mm-hmm.
Just an observation.
Well, I think some of, can I make sure I understand? So the area is essentially north of Hillcrest and east of 23?
Correct. And then south of
Okay.
Jans.
And
then
south
also
of Jans.
it's west of Herbs. West of Herbs,
Okay.
south of Jans,
Yep.
north of Hillcrest. Big block.
Yeah, I think some of those, some of those areas actually, that's an area that already actually allowed more higher intensity and just medium density residential in the existing general plan. So there's sort of a mix of apartments, 2-3-story apartments in that neighborhood and single family homes. I think what we tried to do,
not above Hillcrest,
to
my knowledge.
Okay.
It's just below Hillcrest there are, but not above Hillcrest.
Right. Yeah, I thought it was above as well. I very, very well could be wrong in looking at it, but that's an area. If you if you know that area really well and you have ideas, go into the map and sort of mark things up, and put comments on there, and we're happy to look at those. I think I would look at the existing general plan map, because I think we tried to be consistent with it in most of them, in most of the alternatives. So that was, but if you think that there should be a modification to that, this is a good time to go in and say, hey, this is a single family neighborhood, let's leave this as it is, or this is an area where we could have duplex, triplex.
So then, Matt,
or whatever your vision
is, that area was already somehow identified, previously for potential for some, changes and additional housing and things like that. Because I always thought it was just R1. I didn't believe that it could be split. So.
Yeah, if you go to the, and I honestly don't remember the city's 50 square miles, and I haven't memorized what the existing general plan is. But if you go to the briefing book and look at the map feature, and you can click on the different layers. So you can actually click on the layer of the map that's existing general plan or existing land use, and see what that area, either the existing land use or the existing general plan, is now, and then see how it changes through the alternatives. So it's an interactive map that you can do, and you can also put comments on the map if you think that something is not designated properly. And this goes not just for the area, what we call the areas of change, but the entire city itself.
Is there any map,
again, go through it, and if you find stuff.
Is there any map that identifies city-owned property?
Not specifically, no.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have a follow-up for Kenneth. I think the property you were talking about the old public works yard, I think you're talking about the school bus yard, and it used to be school property. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. No. I can't, you're muted.
Kenneth, you're on mute. So if you want us to hear you, you have to unmute.
Sorry guys. It's the one on Kelly at Newbury Road.
Yes.
Right behind what's left of the school.
Yes. So that is owned by a private property owner now, and we have an active application on that for a mixed use project with apartments and preservation of the timber school, and some commercial, and I think a hotel in the front. It's gone through.
I don't think you've put up the placard yet. Typically,
no, it's not quite ready for that, but it's in the process. So I just wanted to clarify that was a school-owned property.
Yes.
School district, and they went into an agreement, and a private party purchased it.
So they're looking for mixed use as well. Is that correct?
Yes, apartments and commercial, and I believe a hotel in the front.
Even though there are already 2 hotels within walking distance of that. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway.
There are, by the way.
And they do their own market study, so hopefully that's pinned
So
out.
that's an example, as Matt was pointing out, of ongoing proposals that, you know,
Yes.
that you can't just stop at this point.
Correct.
Not that it's, I think it's a very attractive location for residents, residential, but anyway, I'll keep an eye on that, public hearings and so forth.
Right. Yeah, it's apartments. It's a couple hundred units of apartments behind it.
And would those be, those are not subject necessarily to low income requirements or anything like that? Those are wide open in terms of what the owner can charge?
I believe that they went through that pre-screen process, and I believe the council approved it with a certain percentage of
That would be low income.
but I can't tell you what the numbers are. I'm sorry. Okay. I could look it up and get back to you, or you can.
I have them.
Public hearings.
Lay it on me, Ian. What do you got?
So 218 units were allocated, and 26 were set aside for affordable. We don't have the exact terms because there's going to be in a specific plan and probably a development agreement, but the assumption I'm going with based on the planner's input is it's going to be split half very low, half low. So 13 and 13.
I see.
And we'll just see how it plays out through the process.
And that, in order to get, before construction would begin, we're looking at a period of time between now and when construction might actually begin if all approvals go through. The time frame, it can take a while. I mean, I don't know how long it is, but there's a period of time that they go through the entire process before we would see groundbreaking, if you will. Okay.
Certainly.
Got it.
I see Mandy has a hand up.
Mandy. Mandy, you are on mute. Did you want to ask a question?
Hi, I did have a question. I just wanted to know, you know, this process has obviously taken a while. After we have these Zoom conferences end, you said we could do the survey. Is there any kind of focus group where you're actually reaching out to residents in different neighborhoods? Or, you know, how do we, you said it's about a year or up until October. Where do we go from here?
We are going to have another we're going to have more general plan advisory committee meetings. We are going to have, I believe, a combined general plan advisory committee and public workshop. We're going to have more online surveys, and then we're still, you know, working through the engagement once we get to specific policy topics, such as, you know, climate change or parks and open space. We've already had some meetings on that, but we, you know, we may have other meetings as we move forward to review the policy direction. You know, as of now, we are not planning on having individual meetings with individual neighborhoods to talk about specifics in that neighborhood.
Okay, thanks for that. I also had another question about the 81,000. You know, you said that it's a state law, that it's all cities have that. So is there no relative rollout? I mean, what blows my mind is if you think that we're 120,000 residents and we at least put only 2 people in each apartment. I mean, we've tripled our size in, you know, in 20 years. How does this relate to our city in terms of, you know, the state could change its mind and then all of a sudden we've got 81,000 that we don't really need?
Well, let me see if I can clarify that. The state is not telling every city that they need to have 81,000 housing units in it. The state, what the state has said is that jurisdictions are not allowed to make land use changes that reduce the overall residential capacity of the city. So the big picture of all of this is that for many, many years, communities, a lot of communities in California have shunned residential growth. And the state has an incredible deficit. You know, the official number is like 2.4 million, but there's ranges of 800,000 to 3 million housing units, not people. These are housing units all across the state. So the state legislature has been pretty active in recent years of doing things to try and allow housing to be built, because the impact of stopping housing all across the state has had a tremendous impact on, is going to have a tremendous impact on affordable housing prices and on the overall state economy as businesses are moving out because housing is too affordable. So the state has sort of made this decision that they need to do something because the individual decisions of jurisdictions aren't producing the housing that is needed in order to support the overall growth that the state is seeing. And so that's what this RHNA process is about, which is identifying a larger number of units that need to be planned for in each jurisdiction at different income levels. The state has also said, and this is what Kari had mentioned, which is the state has also said that if you have a certain capacity in the city now for amount of housing units, you can't make changes beyond that. So the city can't actually just say, you know what, our capacity is 81,000 now, but we decided we only want to go to 50,000, because that would constrain the amount of housing that could be built in the city. And the state has said we can't allow cities to do that. So the state has said whatever your capacity is in the city, you can't make changes to reduce the overall capacity. You can shift where it goes in the city, but you can't reduce the overall capacity in the city. So then there's the question of development and how development happens and where it happens. And as Kenneth mentioned, there's a parcel behind the Coles that has been vacant for decades where nothing has happened on it. And it is absolutely a prime parcel for development. And I don't know why it hasn't been built, but it hasn't. So we see this happening all over because it's based on the individual decisions. And I know that was a complicated answer to your question, but again, this is sort of the idea. It's what the capacity is compared to what's being planned.
But how do we reach that capacity? I mean, I was at all your planning, before COVID, where we were meeting face to face, and all the residents, I mean, 90% of the residents said we moved here because we love the green open spaces. So I thank you that you have decided, to keep those spaces and just find pockets. But 81,330, whatever, it's a lot for us to conceptualize that the city is going to have in 20 years. And what I'm trying to understand is if not every city has, if not every city has gotten that X amount, why are we not doing this relatively? Why are we not doing a build out percentage-wise in relation to our residents? Sorry, just wanted to finish the sentence.
Okay, so just two things. So one is the 81,000 is a full build out number. It is a capacity that we think is never going to be identified. So it's, the capacity of the city since its inception has essentially, in 1970, has essentially been 81,000, the build out number. Where are we now? We're at 48,000. So, it's been 50 years and you're barely over halfway to that number. So we don't think this is common, and it's what I've been trying to kind of say. Every city has a capacity that it way exceeds where it is today and where anyone thinks it will ever get to. And the reason is because it's just maximum build out. If you take the acres of land and multiply it by the maximum density, that's how you get to the 81,000. It's not that it's actually going to happen. What we need to do is look at a 20-year growth amount, which is going to be far, far, far less than the delta from where we are now to 81,000, which is 33,000. Yes. We're gonna have a number that is much less than that.
Well, I mean,
which is what the 20-year growth projection is.
Okay, so that's exactly what I mean. That to me is a logical progression. That's what I do, financial analysis. No one would do that if you're growing a corporation. So I mean, I see that the same as when we're growing our city, but it's one thing to say, oh, we never think we're going to do it. What if we get irresponsible people in our planning commission or our city council that go, oh, okay, 81,000, we're just going to do it. I mean, do we account for that in the general plan, or how does that work?
No, I mean, that's what the political process is for.
Okay.
So the fact that development, again, and Sean Maradian talked about this with the Thousand Oaks Boulevard corridor. There's been 200 and some odd units that have been approved in 10 years along the corridor. That's it, right? So there's 10 years. There's half of the growth projection that we are looking at a 20-year growth projection for this plan. It's through 2045. So, 22 years. In the last 10 years, there's only been 200 plus units along Thousand Oaks Boulevard, 3 miles of Thousand Oaks Boulevard, approved for development.
Oh,
Right?
that
So
puts it in
the
perspective.
capacity,
Thank you.
the capacity is much greater than that
Okay.
in that area.
Okay.
So
Thank
again,
you for
capacity
clarifying
versus
that.
what's actually going to happen. Yeah. Okay,
Matt,
Sarah.
I just want to jump in really quick. I didn't mention this earlier, but we do have a hard cutoff today at noon because we do not have our Spanish translators available to stay later. So you got about 60 seconds.
Okay, Sarah, quick.
That's hilarious, but I want to know about affordable housing and what the state mandates in terms of affordable housing units, and then what that number, why is it all apartments? Are we talking about affordable homes for people to buy, or is this just all apartments?
Affordability, it's not rental or ownership. It is simply affordable. There are different density levels. The state doesn't care how the homes are built. They just want the homes to be affordable, and they want housing to be built. And the density number for the very low and the low income of 30 units an acre is a proxy for affordability.
Okay, I'll have to, obviously, with 2 seconds left, I'll have to find another time to address this.
Okay.
Feel
All right,
free,
we are right at
anybody
noon.
who has any other questions, feel free to email gp@toaks.org, or you can submit a comment online. And don't forget to complete the survey by March 15th.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.